Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Koshin West. I'm the founder of Integral Transformative Bodywork. My pronouns are he, him. We are going to get into today. We are doing another Sunday school. So this Sunday, or this month of September, we're focusing on the two foundational practices of ITB. The two foundational practices of ITB are shadow work and witness consciousness meditation. So far, we've actually given a fair bit of conversation to what shadow work is. We've got a couple other videos dedicated on our YouTube channel dedicated to we dedicated a whole month to shadow and shadow work conversation. So we've kind of covered a fair bit about that, but we haven't really covered a whole lot about what witness consciousness meditation is, why to do it. It's kind of come up in some other dialogues here and there. But we want to kind of put a finer point on it about why is witness consciousness meditation part of our two foundational practices. What's the big deal? Why should we include them? Why should you do them? Why should you participate in that way? So we're going to talk about how witness consciousness today. We're going to talk about how witness consciousness meditation contributes to full recovery and personal transformation. How, because those are slightly different and it contributes in slightly different ways, but very significant ways. And we're going to kind of get into that a little bit. We have some folks joining us from different areas. We may get some questions along the way. If anybody is joining us after the fact, after this recording on YouTube, then please feel free to mention what video you're watching, and then ask a question via email. Our email is embodyingitb@gmail.com. Just hop in there, let us know what video you were referring to, and then ask your question. I'll be happy to respond as best as possible in relationship to that. Usually I'm pretty good with emails. It's usually within 24 hours. So we do pretty good as far as that's concerned. All right, so without further ado, we're going to jump on in and see what we can find today. So Integral Transformative Bodywork has 5 pillars. These 5 pillars are all extremely important. All these 5 pillars are domains of human investigation that are very, very significant. They're components of academia, personal transformation. They're part of the religious and or spiritual world, the contemplative traditions of investigating what is it like to be human? What is this human experience about? And what is this human experience about in relationship to all of this emerging, profound vividness, strangeness, chaos, excitement that unfolds around us? What is our human experience in relationship to reality and unfolding consciousness? So the 5 pillars of ITB are witness consciousness meditation. We oftentimes shorten that to WCM. Witness consciousness meditation, body work, which meaning it has to do, we're primarily, I am a massage therapist by training, and we have a lot of massage therapists in our crew. ITB is geared towards training massage therapists, so massage therapy is an important component. Body work in general is an important component of recovery and full recovery and personal transformation. Shamanic and energetic medicine, we shorten that to SEM. So SEM is another portion of our our pillars of ITB. Integral theory is another pillar, and raw communication. It's hilarious. I can get through like all 4, and then I forget about a 5th one. And what that 5th one is on a regular basis, it always changes, but I always seem to forget one, or it seems to take a second for me to remember the damn thing. I created ITB and I forget about the damn pillars every once in a while. Anywho's all. So the 5 pillars of ITB are in place because they're domains of human investigation, and they teach us about how to be human, what it's going to take to unfold as a full, embodied, vivacious, dynamic, awakened human being. Within the 5 pillars, there are certain activities that are kind of non-negotiable. What we say in ITB is that we suggest that no pillar should be kind of left out of your education. If you decide to take up ITB as a life practice, or as a recovery practice, as a personal transformation practice, our suggestion is that go towards the pillars that are maybe exciting to you. Study those pillars, and always remember to hit all the pillars and incorporate all the pillars in your education, because They're inherent in our assessment, and they are inherent to the personal transformation process. Not one of those should be left out as far as our evolution is concerned, as far as our full recovery process or our personal transformation process is concerned. None of those are to be left out. That being said, there also are ones that are essential to making sure that you proceed through the full recovery process or through the personal transformation process in a I I'm hesitant to say an efficient way, but in a way that is, I guess efficient is close to it, but we hope to make sure these two foundational practices are in place, because if they're not in place, they can cause a whole lot of strife. They can cause a whole lot of confusion. They can cause pitfalls. They can cause us to spin our tires for years, if not decades at times. And they can get us sometimes wrapped up in some practices and some lifestyle stuff that's trouble, okay? And so efficient is a good word for it, all right? And like I said, these two primary practices, the two foundational practices, are really, really, really meant to, it's meant to make sure that you don't spin your tires and you don't get in trouble and you don't get messed up. And I put these in place because primarily my own personal experience, I found that I fell into several pitfalls and spun my tires for several years with certain components of these. And after the fact, made the realization of, holy crap, if I would have just continued the WCM or the shadow work stuff, if I would have just continued those two foundational practices, they would have kind of led me through this kind of confusion, these weeds that I was in, because the primary issue with most of the weeds, with most of these territories for possible pitfall, the major issue is that you have to self-reflect. You have to take some type of witness kind of situation. There has to be a skepticism and a deep kind of heart-centered investigation into them in order to kind of understand their value and not get maybe preoccupied or hung up in certain areas. So the two foundational practices I have found in hindsight to be valuable to me in my own personal practice, but then in teaching other people, whether they be clients that I coach, or whether they be the folks that I mentor, other healers and body workers and now yoga practitioners that I mentor, it really decreases the amount of problems they run into. It really decreases the hangups they run into. And so for me, the proof is in the pudding. And so it's really, really a wonderful practice, and that's why we pass it on. So the two foundational practices are witness consciousness meditation and shadow work. So we're going to get into those in just a second about how they help. But first, I want to make sure we define a couple of these terms that I've been using here. If you haven't touched in with us before with ITB, we have some phrases that we use that are specific to us. And one of the ones you're going to hear a lot with this, and that you've heard already, is full recovery. What is full recovery? Full recovery is, the quick and dirty definition is full transcendence through inclusion of whatever trauma and every trauma that we've kind of gone through. Now that seems very lofty. It is meant to be lofty. Full recovery is always something that we're kind of building, and it's never something we expect to be done with. So it's kind of like a work in progress. Full recovery is a willingness to include all of our history in the process of healing from it and recovering from it, and kind of moving on from it and moving through it. To unfold into something else. So trauma in and of itself, a lot of times folks ask the question, well, why don't you just use the term recovery? Isn't recovery okay? Recovery is not okay with me, because the term recovery means a whole lot of things in different fields. So if, for me, as I come from a massage therapy, physical therapy background, recovery for that field means a host of different things. On the most basic level, it's simple. Recovery just means that you can sit on the toilet and get off the toilet, get into your car and get out of your car, get into your bed and get out of your bed, get into the shower and get out of the shower. So recovery is really like this really baseline type of physical activity, basically that you can do the basic needs of your lifestyle. Recovery oftentimes in physical therapy and massage therapy world doesn't always include this greater, larger story of not just am I physically kind of able to return to quote unquote normal function, but how have I kind of grown through that experience? How have I evolved out of and through my injury, my trauma, whatever that may be. And so for me, just the term recovery seemed wildly insufficient because we're not just interested in some type of physical experience. And so in ITB, we want to draw attention to the fact that we are interested in the physical, but we're also interested in what does it look like to transcend and include a trauma having to do with our mental, emotional, psychological, and or spiritual orientation. What does that look like? How do we do that? What's the point of that? And what can we expect as we do that? So ITB answers that question. In fact, that's primarily what ITB is created for, was to answer the question of what is full recovery. It also contributes, obviously, to personal transformation and things along those lines. But another way of talking about how what full recovery is like it's integration of not only a cure, but the healing process. So some people have had the experience with really serious situations. Similar, we hear this out of cancer patients quite often, where they say, all right, well, I'm no longer, my cancer's in remission. So the doctor may use the term like, you're cured now, you're in remission, there's no cancer active in your system, and you're okay. And a lot of times the cancer patient says, all right, well, that's cool that I'm cured, but I don't feel like I've healed from this experience. So this is kind of what we're kind of talking about in full recovery, is kind of like a fuller experience of not only just being physiologically quote unquote healthy, but also making sure we include this whole human experience. So that's what we call full recovery. That's how we relate to full recovery. Also something that comes up in this is we are wanting to kind of change our philosophical orientation. What happens in full recovery is we go from I am a human I'm a traumatized human, and we shift that perspective to I'm a human being that has experienced certain trauma. So in another way of saying it is I am a human being who has experienced these things, and I can relate to my trauma instead of relating to the world from my trauma. So this may seem like a splitting of hairs for some people, maybe just a play on words or a play of semantics, but what we find with people who are in recovery of different kinds, this is actually a night and day experience for them. There are a lot of situations in the trauma experience where people feel kind of possessed by what has happened to them, possessed by what they've been traumatized by, trauma events, and they kind of live from navigating how to dodge those things, or they're constantly making choices based off of that experience of their trauma, rather than making choices about what they want to do and then seeing how they can, whether their trauma is even viable in relationship to those choices. So like I said, for some folks it sounds like a play on words, but in reality the philosophical shift is pretty monumental. So full recovery also speaks to that, and that's one of the goals of full recovery, is to recognize that you're just a human being, that at the end of the day, no matter what traumas you've gone through, you are a human being, you'll always be a human being, and these things will be, you're going to get hit by certain things from the outside in this world, and that's going to be that. And instead of identifying as this trauma experience, we identify as a human being. And this can be sometimes a very difficult stretch for a very long time. All right, so we recognize that full recovery is a part of that one. Also within full recovery, we recognize this information that was handed down to us by Peter Levine in his research with somatic experiencing. We use two types of the term trauma. So this is a conversation where we talk about the difference between lowercase t trauma and capital T trauma. So lowercase t trauma, in this conversation, it's kind of like a sliding scale of severity. And so there's a lot of things that kind of maybe add to the element of how severe things are. But a trauma, the most basic type of definition of trauma, is anything that overwhelms the system, whether that be your physical systems or your mental systems or your psychological systems or your body systems. That's what we consider a trauma. And so there are lowercase t traumas and there are capital T traumas. A lowercase t trauma is, maybe you burn yourself while you're cooking. That's an overwhelm of your physical body. Your physical body responds by a swelling response, dealing with the damaged tissue, and starts to recover. that would be considered a lowercase t trauma. Um, so maybe you burn yourself while you're cooking, and it's a minor burn. It's something that you're relatively capable of healing, but it's going to take a little while, and it's going to impact your day-to-day activity. This is a lowercase t trauma. We humans bump into all kinds of lowercase t traumas on a regular basis, and as they should, they kind of teach us, they train us, they guide us, and they inform us about where to go from there. So the overwhelm level is kind of like a low overwhelm. It's agitating, it's going to mix up your life a little bit, but it's not going to shake you out of your tree and change your world 100% and turn it on ear. So as we kind of go up the scale to a capital T trauma, the capital T trauma is a recognition that this is an overwhelming experience that has really fractured your orientation, your philosophy, your view of reality, your view of how life occurs. It's very much shaken up your philosophical orientation. It's most likely shaken up and confused your personal relationship to yourself, your body, your mind, your relationships. So the capital T trauma, whatever it is, it can take on a lot of different forms. The capital T trauma is really something that is going to impact your life in probably more along the lines a decade or more type of an experience. It's very much going to shape how you relate to the world, if not forever, quite honestly. It's going to impact who you are in a fundamental way. So these are usually traumas that lasted for a very long time. The amount of time when we are paying attention to the sliding scale of trauma, the major factors that contribute to capital T trauma are immobilization, like how much you couldn't escape the situation. And that's not just physical immobilization, that's also psychological immobilization. And then how long that immobilization was. So those two primary factors, our researchers and Peter Levine have confirmed, will increase the probability of long-term um, uh, body-mind effects in relationship to trauma, what oftentimes we call PTSD, and different severities, different levels of severity in PTSD. So if PTSD is usually going to set in, it's usually from like a medium to high trauma, and there's going to be very specific markers. And the longer you stay mobilized, and the longer you stay, the more the immobilization factor, and then how long you are immobilized is going to be the primary factors about how that trauma can be rated as far as medium T to a capital T type of experience. We're not, and once again, I want to make sure that sometimes when people hear this, they get the idea that we're kind of rating and kind of degrading some people's trauma. We're not wanting to do that. We're wanting to let everybody know that whatever their trauma they've experienced, whatever tragedies they've experienced, they're all real, they're all valid, they're all important to you, and we're not wanting to kind of compare each other's traumas. Every human being will rate and relate to us, what we could identify as maybe something as a similar trauma in a different way. So if we say something like a trauma event like a car accident, every human being is going to rate that trauma and relate to that trauma a little bit differently because they're an individual human being. So for some people, that the very same accident with a lot of the same damage and the same risk, some people may relate to that trauma. That could literally be a medium to low T trauma, depending on their philosophical orientation, the way they experience the situation, the way their body-mind exists and unfolds, compared to other people who may have an almost identical type of an accident, a car accident, and have a very strong, like medium to very high capital T trauma type of walk away from it with a capital T type of trauma. So it really kind of depends on who's having the experience. So this is why we don't want to say that your trauma is less than mine. We don't really want to go around comparing those things in a real life experience. But when we think about talking about trauma and overwhelm of the system, the sliding scale idea from lowercase t to capital T trauma is just a different way to quantify it. And it's not wanting to make it into a situation where just because I didn't have the same situation as someone else, or I don't have a big trauma like that, it doesn't mean my trauma isn't valid anymore. We don't want to play that game whatsoever. Any trauma that you identify as a trauma in your life, We need you to really wholeheartedly embrace that and recognize that doesn't matter as far as other people having heavy traumas or other things like that. Even if somebody walked away from that accident with not a whole lot of high-end trauma going on, if you walked away from it with the capital T trauma, that is your journey, that is your experience, and that is valid. That doesn't make you any less or any weaker or any wronger than that person or something along those lines. There's no implied lack if you walked away from a similar thing with even more trauma than someone else. So we don't want to measure in that way when it comes to our own personal experience of it. But if we're objectively looking at this, these are ways that we can kind of measure that stuff. So we don't want to cross the streams. We don't want to confuse objective and subjective relationships to trauma, because that's super bad, and that dehumanizes folks a lot of the way. That dehumanizes the client or those of you that are going through the experience. Sorry, I slipped into teaching therapist mode. Sorry. So I wanted to define what full recovery was, and I also wanted to throw in some of the other concept of trauma and ideas as far as that's concerned, because we're going to kind of touch back on those guys in the future as we talk through this. The difference between full recovery and personal transformation. What is personal transformation? Defining personal transformation, this is primarily a committed exploration of interior and exterior reality intended to deepen, heighten, include, and transcend that which we have embodied heretofore. So the major component of personal transformation is actually personal exploration. It's an interior and exterior exploration of reality. It is my opinion, as well as the integral community's opinion, as well as the human potential's opinion, that one of our greatest responsibilities of inhabiting a human body and experiencing this human consciousness experience is to explore what it's like to be human, is to contribute to the ocean of consciousness that we all swim in. Having, what is it like in this body, yours and mine, what is it like in this signature body to explore reality? What's it like to taste that food? What's it like to drink this stuff? What's it like to have a relationship this way, have a relationship that way? What's it like to explore my physical body, my emotional body, my mental body, my quote-unquote energetic or spirit body? What is it like to do those things? What's it like to raise children? What's it like to have a powerful relationship? What's it like to create something? What's it like to whatever, insert, fill in the blank as far as that's concerned. It is the belief that as we explore, the more we explore, the more we humans have a tendency to include and exclude that which is true or that which is valid. And so this is where we start to see stages of development unfold. We can see very, 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 very clear guidelines of value systems evolving over time. And those value systems evolving over time seem to have a direct relationship to how much a person explores both internally and externally. So, there's this whole, we have a lot of racial tensions happening in our American culture and here in the States right now. And there's this saying, I believe it was Mark Twain, he has something to the extent that travel is toxic to your prejudices. He has said something along those lines. But his point is that the more you explore the world, the more you see the world, the more you experience other human beings, the less you have prejudices towards other human beings, the less you think you're super duper different and that those people over there are different and bad and wrong. So the more you travel, the more you interact with other human beings, the more you find out that we have more in common than separates us. Okay, so this is kind of, there's a lot of phrases and conversations out there in the world that kind of point to this reality. Personal transformation is very much that exploratory process, and we must explore. It seems to be a primary component of the human consciousness to explore in our own path, in our own way. And that seems to be essential to our personal transformation, our personal growth, and our deepening as human beings. In ITB, we use the integral map as a touchstone. It's kind of like this map of, okay, this is what the human experience looks like. This is what the human experience involves. So we need to be paying attention to this whole integral map in order to truly, fully explore this human potentiality, this human experience. So this is why it's included. This is why the integral map and integral theory is included in ITB. So personal transformation is that investigation, is that journey, is that exploration. Personal transformation is also part of personal transformation is cleaning up your history and becoming so deeply intimate with your history that your history doesn't bind you anymore. So there is, in shadow work, in the conversation of the personal transformation movement, oftentimes for a long time there was this focus on just transcend, transcend, transcend. Don't worry about your past, don't focus on your past, focus on now and focus on becoming more, focus on evolving. So they drop a lot of hyperbole. There's a lot of these very lofty ideas and lofty perspectives and lofty, really cool terms that they can come up with. But in personal transformation, what we have found is being deeply aware of where we came from and where we want to go helps us move into the present moment more fully and more honestly and more openly. So for the personal transformation movement, there also is that other component of that deep attention to interiority, that deep attention to where I come from, how I think, how I believe, why I believe those things, the transgressions I have enacted on other people, the transgressions that have been enacted upon me. Becoming deeply aware of our past in order to not be bound by it. So this concept is something that is also part of personal transformation, and personal transformation to be supported, for personal transformation to be supported, involves not only the exploratory process of pushing the edges, but the exploratory process of pushing our interior, pushing down deeper, pushing more into unity, at the same time pushing more into agency and liberation. So there's multiple directions happening there. So we want to be really mindful as far as that's concerned. So these are kind of our definitions of full recovery and personal transformation. Are there any questions coming up at this point in time right now? All right, so we fixed some of the audio stuff. We got some information about some of the audio issues, so we'll just continue on. So we have our definitions for full recovery. We have our definitions for personal transformation. Personal transformation, once again, full recovery is full transcendence and through inclusion of any trauma that's come up for us. We also talk about in trauma or full recovery, we talk about I am a human being who's experiencing trauma, not a traumatized human being. So we talk about that slight shift of philosophical orientation and how we view our relationship to our humanity and the trauma that's maybe visited us. And also within the definition for recovery, we talked about that that objective sliding scale of a capital T trauma compared to a lowercase t trauma. Lowercase t trauma being something that impacts us for a very short period of time, may change and hurt our body or hurt our mind, but also that we are able to integrate and recover from and not be too overwhelmed by for a long period of time. Capital T trauma, on the other hand, the closer we move away from lowercase t trauma and the closer we move to capital T trauma, what we notice is two primary factors. Immobilization, so the more the higher the probability of you being immobilized both bodily and physically is a major factor, and then how long that immobilization, how long that trauma went on. So the idea of if you are stuck physically in a scary, life-threatening situation for 5 minutes, the nervous system seems to respond differently than if you're trapped in a life-threatening situation, immobilized physically for 3 hours. So the physiological system, the nervous system, seems to respond differently in a relationship to those two. So that's kind of one of the ways we talk about a lowercase, objectively talk about lowercase t trauma and capital T trauma. From a subjective perspective, though, we should honor all traumas that are impacting us as valid, important, and worthy of attention. And we should never compare and contrast my trauma to someone else's trauma, because every human being is uniquely different. Every nervous system is uniquely different. And even though we could have a similar looking trauma, maybe even identical looking trauma, it doesn't mean our personal subjective experience to that trauma is going to be the same as someone else. So we don't want to measure ourselves in relationship to trauma. This capital T or this lowercase t to capital T trauma is simply an objective kind of marker in relationship to that. And we don't want to over analyze that or use that to kind of poo-poo ourselves or to kind of dehumanize our trauma experience. We then also talked about personal transformation. This definition is a committed exploration of interior and exterior reality intended to deepen, heighten, include, and transcend that which we have embodied heretofore. It is an active engagement of the human experience intended to vivify and unveil consciousness in its complexity and dynamism. So it is an act of exploration. It is also an act of excavating and unveiling the edges of consciousness, both if we think it in a kind of dynamic expansion, as well as a deep and unified experience internally in an experience. So these are things that these are two definitions we want to clarify before we kind of go forwards in relationship to why witness consciousness is so important. So if we look at now, getting to the actual item after we've defined some things, why witness consciousness meditation? Why WCM? What's the big deal with witness consciousness meditation? The big deal with witness consciousness meditation is that it is a different orientation to our human experience. So we're going to kind of share screens here for a second because I am going to talk about some stuff. So as we adjust and start to talk about let me expand this, let me hide this action. So what I want to do here is I want to pay attention to this lower portion of the screen here of this paper. And what happens with WCM, with witness consciousness meditation, is that it brings us in direct contact with this witness, this awareness that's inside of us, that is in pretty much every tradition, even though they use different words, is our essential identity, is our basic identity, the foundation of actually who we are. That's an awfully tall order to define, awfully tall order to make it to, and it's definitely something that has been identified through pretty much every wisdom tradition, as well as science is getting closer and closer and closer to pointing to it in the mindfulness investigation. So there is an awareness, there is a witness that is watching all of this. So when it comes to different types of meditation, this is why we invest there. But before I get ahead of myself, let's talk about other types of meditation. So let's bring our attention down here to this whole situation here, these 3 lines at the bottom. So what we're going to talk about as far as these 3 lines is concerned is we're going to talk about, these are basically representative of 3 different major components of human awareness. So the first one here, the red line here, is what we're going to call gross, okay? Gross awareness. Gross awareness is not like icky, but it has to do with the gross body, the gross physical body. It has to do with our relationship to our physical self and this physical relationship to reality, to the physical world. So in meditation, what we've done is, this is the land, as far as the red line is concerned, this gross realm, this physical realm. We've created meditation that's bound to sensory experiences, physical sensations, senses of hot, of cold, of pressure, of movement of the body, of heat and temperature and things along those lines. So we have meditation that takes us through these experiences, focal point experiences, and focuses on sensations. So these sensations are oftentimes identified as feeling good. We want to feel pure. We want to feel full. We want to feel free. We want to focus on these sensory experiences of our spiritual practice. And so we've created, we meaning all of humanity, the wisdom traditions involved, we created these sensory-based meditation practices of feel the energy move here, feel the energy move there, feel the chakra system in this position, feel it open, feel it close, feel it tighten, feel it do this, feel the, if we're talking about traditional Chinese medicine and the meridians, feel the energy moving through your meridians. And so this is meditation having to do with the physical body and the sensory experience of energy moving through the body. And this is a very valid type of meditation. But it is very limited to that domain of the physical sensory experience. There can be a very powerful blissed out experience that comes along with this physical body experience, this physical meditation. But what the traditions have shown us with the wisdom traditions have shared with us is that it is still a limited component of the experience of higher power. Okay, so higher power lives there, but higher power says, I can show you more. There's more that I am here, but I'm also if you want more of a relationship, come here. So I am here in this physical realm, in the sensory experience, and I want to show you where also I am. So what usually happens, and what happens in a lot of traditions, is we have the physical realm, we have meditations about sensory awareness and sensory practices, and those can be very fulfilling. Those can balance the psyche very nicely. Those can balance the identity very nicely. But one of the primary things we want to do in a lot of wisdom traditions is transcend the identity. We want to get to the deepest, most raw component of our human experience. And so in that investigation, we found that the gross realm is helpful. The gross realm is helpful, is useful. It's definitely going to provide data and information that is valuable, but there is something more raw. There's something deeper. There's something more wildly us that remains. And so then we push into this territory of the green portion, which has a lot to do with our mental, emotional, psychological components. So the green portion here is the domain of the mind. The green portion is the domain of the mental activities of more high-end emotional experiences, conceptual experiences, focused meditation, different activities and plays of the mind, a visualization, different things along those lines. So in this realm, we call this the subtle realm, S-U-B-T-L-E, subtle as in it's subtle. It's not physical, but it's subtle. And in the subtle realm has got a lot of meditation stuff in it. In fact, most of the meditation that most of us first make contact with is a part of the subtle realm. And once again, we are not trying to say that these other realms are not important, but we seem to notice the contemplative traditions have invited us to investigate that if you investigate these other realms, the gross realm and the subtle realm, you will find these realms not able to quench this great question of what is the deeper awareness? What is my most raw condition? What is my most free, most full, most unified, most raw, wide awake condition in this human experience? And so what they have found is that to meditate in the subtle realm is very helpful. It's a control of the mind. Similar to how working the physical, the gross realm is more of a acquisition of controlling the body. You then also start to see in the subtle realm, it's very much about learning how to control and use the mind in every efficient way that we could ever come up with. So the subtle realm is very much about learning our emotions, learning our ability to use visualization, our ability to navigate the subtle realm as far as our humanity is concerned in relationships and working with concepts. If you're in a spiritual tradition, it's very much about learning and understanding and relating deep moral values, deep understandings and concepts that your religion or your spiritual orientation are conveying or trying to convey. So a lot of the subtle realm is very mental, it's very psychological. And once again, what we find if we do an exhaustive exploration of the subtle realm is that it's full, it's vivid, it's beautiful, it's exciting, but there's something else. It is still unable to answer the question of what is my most potent, raw condition of this human experience. And so before I go to the next one, examples of subtle realm meditation is, once again, focusing on a mantra, focusing on an emotion, focusing on investigating emotions, focusing on concepts, focusing on investigating and navigating concepts and morals and ethics and teachings of a spiritual tradition. Or if it's not even spiritually based, subtle realm is the world of academia, of education, of learning special skills and special information. So it's very much the creative field. So creativity is found here, imagination is found here. So any meditation where I'm visualizing myself doing something, any meditation where I'm harnessing an emotion or an energetic sensation, any meditation where I'm focusing on loving or focusing on being compassionate or focusing on a value or something along those lines. That type of meditation is considered subtle realm meditation, or subtle world or subtle body meditation. Once again, super duper helpful, really, really, really relevant. But once again, we'll kind of show why the WCM, why that witness consciousness meditation is something that works a little bit better than some of the others. If we kind of explore all of the gross realm, if we explore all of the subtle realm, what we find is that there's something else. There's something else that's there, because during all of these, I'm doing something, or I'm taking a role to do something, right? There's a lot of doing, there's a lot of activity here in these, in the subtle realm and in the gross realm. And what our great sages remind us to do is to surrender all these things, is to give up all these things. A lot of the meditation of the gross realm, the red bar here, and the subtle realm, the green bar here, a lot of it is about cultivating the identity, cultivating the body, cultivating the psyche. And there is a kind of enlightenment that's been pointed to throughout the ages that is like a pinnacle of enlightenment. But nowadays, it's probably better to talk about that as identity or ego maturation. It's probably a better way, instead of using the big E word, the enlightenment, we should probably call it maturation of the identity, maturation of the ego, refinement of the identity. Cleaning up your identity and your psyche so well that it's wicked clean when you relate and interact with other creatures. And so this is the red bar and the green bar, the gross realm and the subtle realm, are very much about cleaning up the identity, making sure you're remaining clean, clear, and curious with everything, refining your language, refining your relationship to your psyche, refining your relationships, different things along those lines, which obviously is super duper important. What the traditions point out to, though, is that there is something more. There's something below all those things. In fact, they named it when it was translated from east to west. I believe it was first translated from the Hindu language, but the Hindu tradition, as well as the Tibetan, as well as the Zen Buddhism tradition, they all kind of agree upon its natural condition and state. We also see this in Catholic and Christian mysticism. It shows up in even ancient peoples' traditions of what we would consider shamanic or indigenous peoples' traditions of religion or spirituality. And it is this purple space here. It's this purple territory. They call it the causal realm. It was first translated as the causal realm. The causal realm is called the causal realm because it is the cause of all things. So in the causal realm, a way of thinking about the causal realm is kind of like it is the earth in which the subtle realm sprouts out of, in which the gross realm sprouts out of. So it's the cause of these things. Another I guess analogy or metaphor would be to imagine the canvas in which a painting kind of emerges. Your true identity, your true condition is the canvas, not the painting. The painting can be changed, the painting can be mixed, it can be changed, it can be manipulated, but the nature of the canvas itself is unchangeable. The earth in which the garden grows is the place from which it grows from. It's from which it sprouts from. So this concept of the subtle realm and gross realm, they seem to be the after effect of your original condition, or our original condition, which is the causal realm. There are a lot of different terms for this as far as spirituality is concerned, and different traditions are concerned. We would call this the witness realm, or the witness consciousness realm. In Zen, they call it dhyana mind, clear, deep heart mind. It's this vivid awareness. It's this deep awareness. It's a vast potential territory. So in ITB, we often use that term of vast potentiality. So in this realm, what every tradition has kind of pointed to with different terms and different languages is that our original condition, our deepest condition, our deepest state, the who that we actually are, is this vast potentiality, is this ground of just infinite potentiality, expanding and contracting. The term emptiness oftentimes shows up here in Eastern tradition. So this is the realm, your truest condition is emptiness, and not emptiness in kind of like oh no, I'm empty and I have no experience of existence, like a lost type of an emptiness, or a not a not having type of a perspective of emptiness. The philosophical orientation that very much comes out of these traditions is the emptiness that a bowl has. So if you take a bowl or a cup, that bowl, the value of the bowl and that cup is the emptiness that it contains, right? It's the space. If you have a bowl for soup, or if you have a bowl in front of you, it's only useful because it's empty inside, because you can then fill it with soup. But the other reality is that in a bowl, you can also fill it with water if you need to. You could fill it with food if you wanted to. You could fill it with money. You could fill it with dirt. You could fill it with anything you need to put in here. So the emptiness of the container, the emptiness of the bowl is where the actual richness is. And so when they talk about emptiness, when we talk about emptiness in ITB, and when emptiness comes up a lot in Eastern traditions, that is the emptiness they're talking about. It's the emptiness of vast potentiality. You hear phrases like the power of the hollow bone, or the power of the empty space, or the power of the empty cup, the value of those things, how worthy that is to be a vessel. That shows up in a lot of Western religious and spiritual orientation, to be a vessel of spirit, to be a vessel of creation or of God, whatever their terminology is. It also shows up quite vividly in a lot of indigenous or shamanic practices, that terminology of being filled with spirit, being filled with mystery, being filled with whatever their higher power is. And so this is kind of we bring this up because in witness consciousness meditation, the type of meditation that we suggest you do, the meditation practice is to honor the subtle realm, honor the gross realm, but focus on that empty space, however you're experiencing it. Some of the best technology ITB has found is this tradition called Mondo Zen meditation. I'm a trainer in Mondo Zen meditation. We've done tons of Mondo Zen meditation in ITB. As far as witness consciousness meditation, we use the Mondo Zen practice pretty intensely during our trainings with this stuff. We deliver this to our clients as a way of kind of connecting to their current experience of witness consciousness meditation, or of the witness experience of this causal realm emptiness, this vast potentiality. And so we recognize that stuff and we honor that stuff, and we teach folks how to witness from here. And that's the practice. So it looks very, very different from a lot of traditional other types of meditation, of just the sensory experience or the thought experience. Because when we teach this stuff, we teach to pay attention to what it's like to reside as that awareness, and to reside as emptiness has a specific flavor to it. It's a very specific experience. The Mondo Zen meditation was created by Junpo Dennis Kelly, the head of the Order of Rinzai Zen at this point in time. And he did an amazing job putting this together. He teamed up with his right-hand man at the time, Doshin Michael Nelson. Doshin is my direct teacher in Integral Zen. And Doshin and Junpo did this wonderful practice of, really, really testing the mettle of Mondo Zen with so many different communities, and really brought on board this really beautiful technology and hammered out this really beautiful technology. And so Mondo Zen is one of our primary tools for using this in a kind of guided meditation type of a practice. ITB myself guides, a Mondo Monday on the 2nd and 4th Monday of every month. So you can join us if you want to explore more of that. You can join us in a group context, or if you want to learn more of that individually, of course, you can contact us. But the Mondo Zen technology, the Mondo Zen questioning process, guides you through these 16 questions of finding out what is it like to experience this witness inside of you, this awareness inside of you. We use it as far as like why we use it in ITB. We use it because we have found the witness, when a client starts identifying with witness, when they really are feeling their witness consciousness meditation, and the more they feel it and they really kind of settle into that experience of their vast potentiality, what we notice for the client, for really anybody that participates in this, what we notice is that there's a change of relating to self. And that change that occurs is paramount for us. It's like such a major shift in their relationship to themselves, because what starts to happen is they start to relate to their history, their trauma, their perceptions, their biases. They start to relate to those in a way that's gentle, in a way that's accepting and willing to see it. So the term witness itself, relates to this concept of I'm watching something. So this is where our next, what's it called? Our other picture here kind of tells the story. I'm gonna pause this share for now. And I wanna check in and see if there are any questions that come up. So we're gonna pause real quick and then we'll come back. So our next image that we're going to jump into here is a really quick little drawing I came up with this morning. And so it's kind of going to tell the story a little bit more of what's happening as far as the human experience is concerned, and how, when, why the witness is helpful. So one of the things that we notice is that there is this territory in us we call our identity or our story. The story of who you are. Let me keep this in a first person experience. The story of Jeff is that this body mind experience has been called Jeff by my parents, right? So Jeff has been around for a certain amount of years. Jeff has a certain amount of cells in his body. He weighs a certain amount. He had XYZ for breakfast. He has a certain level of education. He has a certain type of relationship to the world. There's a sex and gender orientation. There's a religious spiritual orientation. There's a political orientation. There's types of traumas and victories that I've had. All these kind of coalesce into this experience of what we call Jeff. And this is my story. This is my identity. This is how I perceive the world. So within the story is how I think about the world as well, what I believe the world to be, based off of my past experiences. Within the story is how I believe certain people are, based off of past experiences or based off of education, my culture, life experience. So within the story is everything we would call you, everything we would call our identity, our ego, our experience of reality. We have divided this a little bit. I've kind of showed a different story here. Of the story, this huge, huge component of reality that is your identity, most of the time we're basically performing only a fraction of it to the outside world. So this portion here, this kind of crescent moon looking thing of a different shade of green, it's meant to reflect that it's green, but it's not your whole story. Primarily because no human being could ever understand your wholeness. The outside world will never see your whole story. They'll never see your whole experience, primarily because a lot of your personal experience happens interiorly and just doesn't get shared. So there's only a certain amount of you that shows up in the world, and we can make some choices about that. So we all have an outer performance of our story. And that's what most people meet. So if people relate to you and they're like, wow, you're an asshole, they're relating to your outer performance reminds them of an asshole. It doesn't mean in your vast story you actually are. It just means that that's, as far as your outer performance is concerned, you have an asshole outer performance. And if that's the case, so be it. You may want to change that. You may not. I'm not quite sure what's going on in your world. But the story is a much deeper, much more vivid experience than just the outer performance. And oftentimes what happens for a whole human being is that they forget that this whole story exists. They actually start to believe they are just this kind of shell, this kind of lens, or this crescent right here. They believe that that is their wholeness. And they are actually lost to a lot of the deeper stories, the deeper prejudices and biases. They are lost to the deeper components of their story that really guide and show them and push them in different directions. They're unaware of what their life experience actually is and how their momentums are guided. They have only a small component of awareness about what they're actually made up of. And this was the whole point of psychotherapy emerging, was we found that there were really problematic things occurring in this outer performance story. People had pretty shitty behavior showing up there, and which we then identified as considered being pathological.
And what psychology understood was that the shitty outer performance behavior was linked to deeper story material. And so the whole psychological, psychotherapeutic world and counseling, personal transformation, coaching, all that shit very much lives in this realm right here. All right. It's very much gross realm, subtle realm type material. I didn't include gross here just because I frankly forgot about it. But I would probably do the outside lining of this shape here as red, because the gross experience is kind of a smaller part, but yet still a important component of this story. So if you could kind of imagine that there for that would be really awesome. So psychotherapy, recovery, a lot of full recovery stuff, or a lot of general recovery and psychotherapeutic counseling and recovery occurs in this realm. And between all this green shit is about full recovery, is not full recovery, is about recovery. It's about counseling. It's about personal transformation and coaching and living your best life and the evolutionary experience, or the inclusion of your integral map. Now notice that the witness is here. The witness consciousness, the purple, is here. Notice how it is a separate relationship to this. Now, I did this very specifically because the witness is not bound to this story. The witness actually ought to be this huge freaking circle that is kind of the base of this. But the witness is a point of awareness watching all of this material. The witness is an awareness inside of us, it's vast potentiality that is not bound by this story. So the reason we have this separate here, the purple from the other two other green components, we want to point to the reality that your truest condition is actually not your story, nor is it your outer performance of your story. But the story can be linked to, the witness can control how it relates to the story. The witness can control how outer performance has or exhibits itself and how it unfolds. So witness consciousness meditation is really important for recovery, full recovery, because only from the witness can we really receive the fullness of the story and see our outer behaviors. The reason I say that is because if I do not have if a person who is recovering from a trauma, what we have found, we have no science for this whatsoever. This is all anecdotal, so don't go crazy on me on this shit. But what we have found over and over and over again is that if a person in recovery does not have a sense of witness consciousness and an awareness in them that is unchanging, undying, an awareness in them that is big enough and vast enough and stable enough that can witness anything, they're going to make a home in some portion of their story. So instead of being maybe up here in this region, the addict, the alcoholic, they're going to come down here into this other portion of their identity, which may be the good person, the dutiful son or the dutiful daughter, the dutiful child, the dutiful child of God, and will make a home in this value system. But notice, that's just trading one story for another story, and it does not touch the witness. Unless that story drives them to the witness, it's just another investment in the story. So when we look at recovery for addiction recovery, trading one set of habits for another set of habits is just trading one story for another story. And while that is helpful, especially in the beginning, that is helpful. What happens in the long term is what we have found with working with addicts that have collected decade chips, have been clean, quote unquote clean, for 1, 2, 3, 5 decades. What we have found is that there remains an identity crisis. There remains a problem with how they see their story and how they relate to those old components of those addiction portions of their story. Now, the answer that I have found and that others have supported is that a person who has a personal experience and really truly has a relationship to witness consciousness and has that experience, it's not that they won't lapse again or they won't have trouble as far as recovery is concerned. What we're saying is that if you learn how to reside from witness, you can examine all these different components of your story with less prejudice, with less condemnation. What we find in addicts and people who are recovering, they look at themselves. They oftentimes look at these old behaviors and they condemn them. They look at themselves as being evil or bad or wrong fundamentally in some way. And this, what we have found, is not just addiction. It's not just substance abuse, people recovering from substance abuse. We find this in people who have had strokes, who get cancer, who get AIDS, who have heart attack issues, whose bodies just start to deteriorate because of a physical event or because they're just aging, or they have some genetic disease. So we see that when a dysfunction or a disease of any flavor or kind hits the story, oftentimes within the story, there's for some reason a condemnation that comes with it, a badness or wrongness. This is very common in the New Age community and energetic community, where they say it's your negative thoughts that have caused your sickness. It's your poor behavior, it's unfinished karma that's manifesting in your body that's causing damage. This is a subtle gaslighting. This is a subtle condemning and a subtle condemning to, you're a bad person because you're sick. And this is, as far as I'm concerned, is intolerable. This is total bullshit. Even if there is some truth to it, the other reality is that you should not be condemned for having a human experience. For feeling shitty, you should not be condemned. For struggling in your life, you should not be condemned. For having parents who were shitty as far as creating an attachment, a healthy attachment system for you, you should not be condemned for that. And what we learn is that the more we kind of investigate about story, about our traumas, about how we perceive the traumas, if we only do gross and subtle meditation, we're always just dancing around in the story. And we never actually get to the witness that can look at all this stuff and looks at it and does not condemn the person for it. So a good example of this, I'll bring this into my personal life if I can do that for a second. Part of my own personal recovery in relationship to losing my family members. So about 15 years ago, my mother passed away, my father passed away, and my grandmother passed away. That all happened within like a fucking 3-4 year period. And it was a very slow deterioration death for all of them. I was their primary caretaker for 2 of those 3. So I was a primary caretaker for my mother and my grandmother. I lived in the house with them as they deteriorated. It was very traumatizing for me. It was the trauma of my existence. It's probably the most powerful trauma of my existence. And so, yes, wow, indeed. And so what we want to pay attention to here is, for my mourning and for my recovery arc, what had to happen was, what I noticed in my process was me looking at this event had several condemning perspectives. I mean, I was of the perspective of like, I understand health. I understand how the body creates disease. I understand how diet can help these things. And there was this really kind of ridiculous voice in me, loving but ridiculous voice in me, that believed as long as I just loved my mother enough and loved my grandmother enough, it was going to keep them from dying. So that's a very sweet idea, but that's also very naive, and it doesn't work. I really wish love kept people alive. It doesn't. All right. So the idea is that in my recovery process, what occurs is that the more I spent time in my story taking up a certain personality or taking up a certain belief system, the more I stayed there, the more I was always in an adversarial relationship with another part of me that failed, that wasn't able to create and fulfill the belief system of that other orientation, of that other voice, of that other self. So there was always this struggle. There was always this attacking of self and shit tons of turmoil. All right. So what occurred along the way was, what I learned, this great gift that my mother and grandmother gave me through their gruesome dying process. One of the great gifts they bestowed upon me was this realization that if I'm always in some component of my story, I'll never be able to heal my story. I'll never be able to heal myself. I'll never be able to recover. So what they taught me through this great pain was I had to reside in some place. I had to go someplace that was more than my story, that was fuller than my story, that was big enough to where the incredible heartache of my story wasn't going to break my mind, break my experience. And that place was the witness, was witness awareness, was that causal realm, the place from that vast potentiality from which all things spring. Doing more of that meditation, what I found was that the nature of vast potentiality is that it is unchanging, it is unbreakable, and any kind of issue that I looked at, the any component of the death of these folks and how I handled that, and what happened in my life during those periods, and what happened, consequently after the next 12 to 15 years, looking back on that, what made it available, what made me able to love those components of me, no matter how gross or horrible, how shitty I did, because I had some shitty behavior during that period of time. I was not at my best at that period of time. I visited some transgressions on some people that I make amends for. I did not handle the relationship to my mother and my grandmother very well. That was very, very messy, that whole process. So there was plenty of things that I did, quote unquote, wrong, that I did shitty in relationship to that situation. What I found was that being able to reside in as witness made myself, created an activity where I could actually allow for myself to receive the wholeness of my story, allow myself to receive the wholeness of my grief, the wholeness of my judginess, the wholeness of my transgressions, and become accountable to my story more fully. And so what we've noticed along the way is that this is not signature to Jeff. What we've noticed along the way with me working with, like I said, substance abusers of different kinds, as well as addicts and personal transformation people that are sick with bypassing or sick with different types of ways of creating substance abuse out of sex or shopping or meditation or religion or something along those lines, is that the more we teach them this witness consciousness meditation, the better off they will be. So for the person who's injured themselves, whether it be a physical or psychological injury, we teach them witness consciousness meditation because that starts to set up in them this awareness, this ability to look at their trauma event, their physical injury, their damage, their situation, and look at it not as in something to that's wrong with them to make right, not as if it's something to fix and get back to another way. It's something to embrace and grow out of, grow and become bigger from. And so what we notice is that the more they reside as witness, the more open and loving and compassionate and receptive they are to the fullness of their dynamism. So for the addict or for those that are sick, I'm getting a question here. Hold on a second. Yes, exactly right, Christiana. I apologize if I didn't make that more accurate. The witness is considered part of the causal realm, 100%. So this is why I made them both purple. I don't know if you can see those on your screen. But the witness is kind of like the representative, the first representative that shows up for the causal realm, because it simply resides. It's not going to try and do anything. It's not going to try and enact. It's just there to witness and be receptive to existence. And that's very much the experience of the causal realm. So those guys are correlated as far as that's concerned. So witness and causal are directly related. So when we talk about the causal realm existing in a human being, the name that's often given it is the witness, okay, or witness consciousness. Good question. Thank you for that. So what we notice is that the more the witness is able to, the more the client is able to reside and learn to reside in witness, the more available they are to the fullness of their story, the fullness of their injury, and how their injury lives in different places. And this is what I found astonishing, is that it doesn't matter if this is a physical injury, like I broke my leg, or I hurt my back, I threw a muscle in my back, or I have a disc pathology in my back. If I had a surgery, I had heart surgery, or I had spinal fusion, or I have been diagnosed with a disease and I'm now on medication, it doesn't seem to matter. We always tell a story about what happens to us. If I get sick, if I get damaged, I always have a story about it. Now, what's we found important and very relevant to full recovery is, what the hell is that story? And who's telling that story? So if you're telling that story from a part of your story, from a part of your identity that thinks that what you did was dumb, that you're a bad person because you have sickness, or you're weak because you have sickness, you're not really relating to the reality of your sickness in a healthy way. You're seeing it in a very partial, very fragmented, very adversarial way. But as a person, what we've noticed as a person kind of settles into this type of meditation and looks at a disc pathology, a surgery, a disease, they look at that disease as just part of this human experience. It's not something that defines them. It's just simply this event that's occurred to them. So if we move this out of a body realm experience and we move it into, let's say, a person who has experienced physical abuse. Maybe this is a person who was beaten by a family member on a regular basis, physically beaten by a family member on a regular basis. So this is oftentimes registered as a serious capital T trauma. So what happens is that there is a very, very, very rich and vivid story about that person that has been beaten, that person that was physically abused in that family. There's a lot of story, a lot of condemnation, a lot of different emotions, a lot of different scenarios that will be living in that person who was physically abused this way. Now, if the person that was physically abused is only looking from another perspective in the story, like I'm going to be a good person looking at why I must have been bad or something like that. I'm looking from one component of my identity, looking at the person or the kid that got beaten on a regular basis. Oftentimes that creates a polar experience. There's an adversarial relationship going on, and it is extremely difficult to really get into the nitty gritty of what happened here. And it is extremely difficult for one to be loving of that self that got beaten and to see that story more fully. And so what occurs is that there's no real healing. There's pulling apart, there's investigation, but it really depends on who's doing the investigation. What part of my identity is investigating this trauma that's occurred? And what we notice is that almost every other component of our identity is insufficient in being able to handle the fullness of the story of my physical abuse. So what we've noticed is that if we give clients the education of moving into witness consciousness has this extremely vast, welcoming receptivity. It's a foundational component of the witness. And when a person starts to reside as witness and they have this history of being physically abused in some form or fashion, first and foremost, they witness it and they start to, oftentimes the first thing that comes up is not anger or pain or sad. It's usually sadness. It's usually this remorse. It's usually this, holy shit, I can't believe this happened to me. And it's not a, why am I so bad for getting that? It is an acceptance that starts to show up for them. Now, of course, their journey towards that is going to be a little bit different for everybody, of course, because everybody's trauma manifests differently and is held differently because we're fucking individuals. But what we've noticed is that the witness seems to be, quote unquote, more capable of receiving and engaging and intimately connecting with the entirety of the story instead of just one component of the story. So the witness conscious meditation for a person who is recovering, if we're seeking full recovery, seems to be the real kind of linchpin of the whole process. It really holds the system together. It really creates this opportunity to see my wholeness, to see the fullness of my trauma, to see the fullness of my actions, to witness and see and be accountable and connected to the fullness of my human experience heretofore. And so witness consciousness meditation is essential, in our opinion, for full recovery, because it gives us the space, it gives us a container that can hold the whole story. So I don't know if you've experienced this in your own life, where you may be looking at a certain component of your history or a certain trauma that you've experienced. You're like, oh my God, I don't feel I can, I don't know if I'm able to touch that right now. It just seems so big. People say these things in counseling and in therapy and recovery. People say stuff like, it feels like if I touch that story, if I go towards that story, it's just going to break me. It's going to shatter my life. These are phrases that come up because they're living in a portion of their identity and a portion of their story. And they're not actually living from the raw condition, the most ultimate condition that is them. They're living from just another, they're one perspective of the story looking at another perspective of the story. And so what we notice is that if we change this a little bit, if we train the client in witness consciousness meditation, the prevailing experience of witness consciousness meditation is that this shit's not going anywhere. You can't break it. It's never come or gone. It's constantly ready. It's constantly available. There's nothing in life that could end it. Okay. And so when we start to identify that, when we start to really feel that, when we start looking at our story, man, that changes how we relate to our story entirely. That changes how we come to love ourselves entirely. And one of the other beautiful things that happens when we focus on witness consciousness meditation is that, holy shit, I actually do start to love myself. There's more and more of a compassion and a love and embracing of what has occurred for me. Not that I'm making everything all puppy dogs and kittens, okay? I'm still acknowledging that the transgressions against me were shitty and people have to be accountable for those. But what we want to do is we take away a lot of the blame we put on ourselves, a lot of the resentment we have towards ourselves because of these traumas that have occurred. So what we notice is that there's a real increase when we reside as witness, a real increase of compassion for self, of acceptance of self, of embracing of self in our story. And that can be oftentimes the major fulcrum of shift for actually creating healing for human beings, that self-love, that self-embrace, that ability to forgive oneself and to honor the nature of the complexity of the situation, and to embrace our wounded selves the way our wounded selves hope to be embraced. So for full recovery, witness consciousness meditation is essential. And in my opinion, if we're going to talk about healing, if we're going to talk about full recovery, this is essential. We can't live this out. Otherwise, if we do leave this out, all we're doing is creating more traditional psychotherapy counseling practices, which are one component of my identity trying to reconcile another part of my identity, and neither one of those are big enough to really handle each other because they don't see the world in a similar way and they don't have a lot of the same faculties within them. And they oftentimes become opposed to each other and thus adversarial to each other. And so we want to decrease that internal adversarialism. We want to decrease the inner confusion and turmoil. So we direct folks to that witness. And what we noticed is that anybody that we guide through this can make contact with the witness, and that this can be a very, very, very powerful tipping point for people and point of empowerment also. Because you don't have to, I mean, this witness is with you all the time, and it's just a matter of practicing and working with it and kind of embedding it over a period of time. So this is what creates, this is why we include, this is why we include witness consciousness meditation as a foundational practice, because no matter who you are, no matter what your intention is, you're going to have to go through some recovery, and that recovery better be sophisticated and all that jazz. So that's why we include that. When it comes to witness consciousness meditation and the human potential process, living our fullness, including our wholeness, becoming the greatest being that we could come up with, however you want to say that stuff. Why witness consciousness meditation is important for that. I kind of touched on it earlier, but I'll review it again. Remember, this green territory, this story, and the outer performance of your story, that's primarily maturation. That's primarily exploring the dynamism of my identity and then embodying it and expressing it. And that shit is delightful and wonderful, and is definitely a part of personal transformation, definitely a part of enlightenment journey. So that is essential, but we also have to remember, if we looked at this bottom set of lines, remember the green and the red are sprout from the causal. The gross and the subtle sprout from the purple, that causal territory. So we have to remember that we can't get overwhelmed or obsessed with the flowers that bloom. We have to make sure to pay attention to invest in the soil. So we're using the metaphor of the soil being the causal realm, the vast potentiality, the witness consciousness meditation. And the flowers or anything that grows out of the soil is our story, our physical experience of reality, as well as our outer performance of our story. And so it's okay to obsess and to pay attention. I wouldn't say it's okay to obsess. Let me rephrase that. It's okay to bring great focus to what your story is and how you're performing, what's your outer performance of your story. That's of great importance. We really want you to pay attention to that. But we don't want you to get confused that just paying attention to your story, just paying attention to your outer performance is going to supply you with the real wholeness that you're looking for. Those are all just skills, essentially. That's one of the deeper stories of the integral map, is that the integral map shows you what's available to the human experience and the human ability. It only points by default to what is the source of those things. And the source of those things is that purple line, that witness consciousness. So to put this a little bit of a different way, your deepest nature is witness consciousness, is that causal realm. Your deepest nature is the soil from which all things sprout. Your identity and your ego and your performance of your identity and your ego are this green portion. They come from the vast potentiality. They are the flowers or the herbs or the trees or the fruit that sprouts out from this rich soil. And of course, you can curate your garden how you want to get whatever fruits or herbs or trees or flowers or whatever you want to grow. But you don't want to confuse the fruits of the garden for the actual soil. You don't want to make that confusion. That's actually one of the pitfalls of spirituality, is confusing the flowers for the soil. And so we want to honor the flowers and honor the beauty of the flowers and the uniqueness of the flowers, but we don't want to forget that without the soil, there is no opportunity for those flowers to sprout. And if you're a good gardener, you know that if you want anything to grow, you need to start with tending the soil and keeping the soil and maintaining the soil far above anything else. You can have the best seeds, you can have the best skills as far as pruning is concerned. You can be dedicated as far as finding the right sources of these seeds and tending these fruits, and you can have all kinds of, for your fruits and vegetables and herbs, you can have all kinds of different wonderful recipes to express those vegetables and fruits magnificent. But guess what? If your soil is shit, you're not going to be able to do any of that stuff. So the analogy really nicely holds that the causal realm, that purple line, is kind of like the garden soil in which things are arising. Okay. And we want to remind ourselves that we want to come back to, when it comes to the human potential process or the personal transformation process, the best plan is to come to and identify as that vast potentiality. The reason is similar to the full recovery conversation, because when you look at your story, you're going to be able to look at your story and you're going to look at your beliefs, your concepts, your superstitions, and your fabrications about reality. You must investigate all those things, and you must come to the conclusion of whether they are true or not. And if they're true, in what ways are they true and in what ways are they false? If they are partially true or partially false, we have to measure that. Where are they definitely true and where are they never true? And this is the complexity of pulling apart these realities. This is the complexity of the human identity and the human ego and the human philosophical orientation. So witness consciousness gives us, residing as vast potentiality, gives us the opportunity to witness our story in a very loving yet skeptical fashion. A very compassionate skeptic looks at that, witnesses it, and can then tease it apart and say, holy shit, I've been living by this superstition. This was a superstition of my culture. This is a superstition of my faith. There's no proof of this. There's no, other than other people's perspectives and other people's beliefs, there's no reality behind this. It's just a event of the mind. And I have to remember that I better not take that event of the mind that has no basis in physical reality, that has no basis in certain portions of reality. I need to stop applying it to those that objective reality, those physical spaces of reality, and condemning myself or condemning other people. So it allows for us to audit the identity. The witness consciousness residing as vast potentiality allows us to audit our identity, audit our story in a way that's much more honest, much more curious, much more willing to be accountable, and also much more willing to adapt and change, to toss out what we don't need or what is false or fabricated, and to include and guard and protect what is feeding us, what is of value. And so for personal transformation or personal growth, or finding out what your greatest potentiality is, this type of meditation, once again, sets us up for not getting caught up in different components, subpersonalities of our identity, not getting caught up in adversarialism in our identity. And it increases the probability of us going through this exploratory process, going through this exploration of interior and exterior with as gracefully as possible, as efficiently as possible. Because what we've noticed is that if you take refuge, if you're going to say, I'm a spiritual person and I want to evolve to my greatest potential, if I want to become the most, I want to personally transform and I want to become the greatest version of myself, if you just go and hide in another subpersonality of your story, you're never going to transcend your story. You're never going to transcend the other components of your story. So a nice example of this is if you believe that your experience of God is only an emotional one, you're leaving out the fullness of your relationship to your higher power. You're leaving out all the other dynamism of your higher power. And curiously enough, higher power has a tendency to strip things away from us as we go through personal transformation, as we go into deeper spirituality. We are there's this tendency in a lot of spiritual traditions where it's not an accumulation of things, it's a surrendering of things. Spiritual transformation, spiritual enlightenment is a giving over of the identity. It's the identity is offered up in service. So if you are hiding out in a portion of your identity, the more you evolve, the more you commit to a spiritual practice and a spiritual opening, the more you're going to have to surrender those things. And the reason you're supposed to surrender them is because you're supposed to come to the realization that you are not your story. You are not your traumas. You are not your victories. You're not your race. You're not your sex. You're not your gender. You're not your education levels. You're not your lineage. You're not any of those things. Those are just things that are a part of this human experience. Your truest, deepest nature is your fundamental witness, your fundamental awareness. And this is one of the great guidelines that this spiritual practice is trying to focus on, and the personal transformation. Right on. I'm glad you're getting some affirmation there. That's awesome. Or that we're affirming some of your insights. That's awesome. So, but this is a great practice. This is a very difficult practice. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention to your story. All right. So whether you are either way, to kind of sum up or bring this to a close here, what we want to keep in mind is that whether your agenda or your interest is full recovery or personal transformation or both, which I personally think they ought to be both. Either way, the use of witness consciousness meditation is superior and more functional and more graceful if you're wanting to commit to these outcomes. Fundamentally because it gives you an opportunity to witness and view your story from a healthy boundary, and creates the opportunity to use and work with your story and all that the story entails in order to clean up any kind of fabrications, any kind of falsehoods, any kind of confusions, as well as sitting in witness consciousness allows you to more effectively tease apart the complexities of ethics, morals, identity structures, traumas. What we notice is that if you are not able to move into a witness place, a witness consciousness situation, and reside as witness consciousness, you can get into portions of your story and portions of your trauma. It just looks so profoundly daunting. It just seems so big. How could I ever pull this apart? How could I ever recover from this? Well, if you reside as witness consciousness meditation, if you reside as witness looks at all this story as, wow, that's so sweet. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you for showing yourself. Oh, how delicious this complexity is. How wonderful this complexity is. Let me investigate. Let me explore. You still have the pain. You still have the emotions and sensations. You still have all of that stuff in the experience of investigating, but you're not bound by, or I should say, you're not bound as much by those other components of your story and you kicking and screaming that you have to keep this portion of your story, or you have to believe this portion of your story, even though it's a fabrication, you have to leave it unchanged or true. So witness consciousness meditation allows us to reside as the witness. So as we look at our story and as we review our life, as we review our personal experience, it creates a more loving territory, a more full and a more stable container to receive the entirety and the totality and the complexity and the richness and the painfulness of our life experience. So all that stuff comes along with it. It's just your relationship to it is vastly different. Witness consciousness meditation is not a weekend retreat. You need to practice it on a regular basis. In ITB, we suggest anybody taking up either the mentorship or taking up full recovery or personal transformation. Witness consciousness meditation has to be a regular practice for them. And what we mean by that is you need to be practicing that activity at least 3 or 4 times a week for at least 30 minutes a time. So the more you do that and the more you do this specific type of WCM, the higher the probability is that you are going to be able to witness your story from a place of love and of compassion, of integration and acceptance and safety. And so this is the suggestion we slide over to you. This is the invitation we give our folks as we do this work. That's us. That's how that goes. That's why we incorporate witness consciousness meditation into this work and why it's here. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of a sign off. Before we sign off here, are there any other questions from anybody else? So thank you for tuning in. My name is Jeff Koshin West, founder of ITB. We've been talking about this experience of why witness consciousness meditation is a foundational practice of ITB. I hope you found this informative. Hope you found this of value, and I hope that you're going to be able to apply this as you see fit, and I hope this feeds you in some form or fashion. If you ever want to learn more about ITB, please reach out to us at embodyingitb.org. You can look up on social media, Integral Transformative Bodywork, both on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Please reach out and check that stuff out. That's how to keep up with us. If you have any questions about this or questions about anything, you can reach out via email at embodyingitb@gmail.com, or you can go through the contact page that's on embodyingitb.org. Once again, this is ITB Sunday School. We meet every Sunday at noon Eastern time, and we discuss all things ITB. Next week, we will be touching on the topic of what does witness consciousness meditation or what does shadow work have to do with full recovery and personal transformation. So we'll be covering that next time. All right. Thank you for your attention. We'll see you next time. Feel free to reach out, and please also feel free to donate if you feel like it. There's no obligation whatsoever, ever. This is always free to anybody that wants it. But please, if you feel like it's helping you, and if you can, then please extend that wonderful donation to us. We appreciate it very much. All right, excellent. Till next time, till next Sunday, we'll see you there. All right, bye-bye.